I took care of my dad for years. Now he's moving in with my brother who barely helped because the brother has more space and then I'm feeling so hurt and blindsided, and I don't know how to handle this. For the past 6 years, I've been the primary caregiver for my dad. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't easy, but I did it because I love him. Now, it feels like none of it even mattered. My dad is 78 and started having serious health issues about 7 years ago. Heart problems, arthritis, early signs of dementia, you name it. Back then, my brother Nick and I had a conversation about how we'd handle Dad's care. I volunteered to take the lead. Nick, on the other hand, had just gotten married and was starting his own family, so he said he'd help where he could. Spoiler alert, he didn't help much. At first, I thought I could juggle everything, my job, my social life, and caring for Dad. But as his health declined, it became a full-time commitment. I cooked his meals, drove him to appointments, managed his medications, cleaned the house, and even helped him with bathing and dressing on bad days. My life essentially revolved around him. I had to scale back my work, which hurt me financially, and I stopped dating altogether because I just didn't have the time. Meanwhile, Nick? He'd visit maybe once a month for an hour or two, bring his kids along, and leave me to clean up the tornado of toys and snacks they left behind. He called Dad occasionally, but those calls usually turned into me getting lectured about things like how I should take Dad out for walks more often or feed him healthier meals. Classic armchair quarterback behavior. To be clear, I didn't resent caring for Dad. He's my father, and I felt it was my duty. But the lack of support from Nick? That stung. Still, I tried not to dwell on it too much. I figured Dad appreciated what I was doing, and at the end of the day, that's what mattered. Fast forward to last week. Dad sat me down for a serious talk. I thought maybe he was worried about his health or wanted to discuss his will. What he said instead absolutely floored me. I've been thinking, and I've decided to move in with Nick and his family, he said, looking at me like he was announcing he just won the lottery. They have more space, and I think it'll be good for me to be around the kids more. I was stunned. My heart sank, and I could barely find the words to respond. But I've been taking care of you all this time. Why now? Did I do something wrong? No, of course not, he said quickly. You've been wonderful, sweetheart. But Nick's house has a big yard, and the kids keep me young. Plus, I don't want to keep burdening you. I felt like I'd been slapped. A burden? After 6 years of sacrificing my time, money, and mental health, he thinks he's been burdening me? And let's not even get started on the more space thing. Nick has a 3-bedroom house. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, sure, but I gave Dad the bigger room and made it work. Still, I swallowed my pride and tried to keep the conversation civil. Okay, if that's what you really want. But have you thought about how this will work? Nick barely helps as it is. Will he actually take on your care? Dad smiled like he hadn't thought about that at all. Oh, I'm sure they'll figure it out. Nick says he's looking into hiring someone to help with the heavy stuff. Hire someone? So now Nick gets to swoop in, play the hero, and outsource the hard work I've been doing for free? The unfairness of it all hit me like a freight train. But it got worse. A few days later, Nick called me to talk logistics. I was already on edge, but I picked up, thinking maybe he wanted to thank me for everything I've done or reassure me that Dad's care would be in good hands. Nope. Instead, he dropped another bomb. So, Dad and I were talking about the inheritance, Nick said casually, like he was discussing the weather. He's thinking it makes the most sense to leave everything to me since he'll be living here. You know, to help with the expenses of taking care of him. I was speechless. Excuse me? You mean the house, the savings, everything? All to you? Yeah, Nick said, his tone annoyingly matter-of-fact. I mean, you've been doing a lot for Dad, but I have a family to support, and we'll have to make some adjustments to have him here. It just seems practical. Practical? Practical? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've spent years of my life caring for Dad, putting my own needs on the back burner, and now Nick gets the inheritance and the glory of being the good son who took Dad in. I told Nick I needed time to process this, hung up, and immediately broke down in tears. I haven't been able to stop replaying the conversation in my head since. Am I crazy for feeling betrayed? Is it wrong to expect some recognition? Or at least fairness, after everything I've done? Right now, I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to confront Dad and Nick and demand they acknowledge how unfair this is. But another part of me wonders if I should just let it go and focus on moving forward with my life. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, a chance to finally get my freedom back. Still, the idea of Nick getting the house, the savings, and all the credit for taking care of Dad makes my blood boil. And let's be real. How long is Nick going to last before he realizes caregiving isn't just cute grandkid visits and yard games? What do you guys think? Should I fight this or just walk away? Am I being unreasonable for wanting some recognition for everything I've done? I decided I couldn't just sit quietly and let this happen without speaking up. So, after a couple of days of mulling it over, I invited Dad and Nick to meet at my place for a family talk. Let me tell you, I was nervous as hell. I didn't want to come across as ungrateful or bitter, but I also knew I needed to stand up for myself. I rehearsed what I was going to say about 100 times in my head before they showed up. When they arrived, Nick was his usual self, smug and annoyingly cheerful. Dad looked uncomfortable, like he knew this wasn't going to be a fun conversation. I started by calmly laying everything out. I wanted to talk about your decision to move in with Nick, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I understand why you think it might be a good idea, but I need to be honest about how this feels from my perspective. Nick immediately jumped in. Look, I know you're upset, but this is what Dad wants. It's not personal. Not personal? That was rich coming from the guy who'd barely lifted a finger for Dad in the past 6 years. I ignored him and turned to Dad. I've been taking care of you for so long, and I don't regret it. But it's hard not to feel like all of that's being brushed aside. You're moving out, which is your choice. But then there's the inheritance. Nick told me you're planning to leave everything to him. Is that true? Dad looked at me with those sad eyes that used to make me feel guilty, but not this time. Sweetheart, it's not that I don't appreciate everything you've done. You've been amazing. But Nick has a family, and they'll need the money more than you will. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So because I don't have kids, my sacrifices don't matter? Do you realize how much I've given up to take care of you? Nick rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. No one forced you to do it. You chose to take care of Dad. That was it. The dam broke. Are you kidding me, Nick? You said you'd help, and then you disappeared. You've done the bare minimum, and now you're swooping in to play the hero. And Dad, you're rewarding him for it. Do you really think he's going to step up now? Or are you okay with him hiring someone to do the work I've been doing for free? Dad looked conflicted, but Nick was unfazed. This isn't about who did what, okay? It's about what's best for Dad going forward. I couldn't take it anymore. No, Nick, it's about you getting a house and money you didn't earn. And Dad, I need to know, do you honestly think this is fair? Because it doesn't feel fair to me. The room went quiet for a few moments. Dad looked down at his hands, avoiding my gaze. Nick shifted uncomfortably, probably because he wasn't expecting me to push back this hard. Finally, Dad sighed. I didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe I didn't think this through as much as I should have. I thought that might be my chance to get through to him, but Nick jumped in again, his tone suddenly defensive. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. If it's about money, we can figure something out. But this is what's happening, okay? Dad's moving in with us, and that's final. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, fine, do what you want. But don't come crying to me when you realize how hard caregiving actually is. With that, I stood up and left the room. I couldn't sit there and listen to Nick's condescension or Dad's excuses any longer. Since that conversation, things have been tense. Dad moved in with Nick last weekend, and the whole thing has been a mess. Nick called me the day after the move to ask a bunch of questions about Dad's medication schedule and dietary needs. Questions he should have asked months ago if he was serious about taking on this responsibility. To make matters worse, Dad already seems unhappy. He called me 2 nights ago to vent about how chaotic Nick's house is. Apparently, the grandkids are a bit much for him, and he's not getting the quiet time he was hoping for. Shocker, right? Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out where I go from here. Part of me feels like I should wash my hands of the whole situation and let Nick figure it out. But then there's Dad, who I still love, even if I'm hurt by his choices. The unexpected twist. Here's where things take an even weirder turn. Yesterday, I got a call from my aunt, Dad's sister. She'd heard about the move and was furious. Apparently, Dad had promised her years ago that the family home would be left to both Nick and me equally, as it's been in the family for generations. Aunt Laura is not one to let things slide, and she told me she's planning to confront Dad about it. On one hand, I'm glad someone else sees how unfair this is. On the other hand, I'm worried this is going to blow up into an even bigger family drama. Nick already thinks I'm being selfish, and if Aunt Laura gets involved, I'm sure he'll accuse me of dragging her into it, even though she called me. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of a mess I didn't create, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. Part of me wonders if this is karma coming for Nick, but I also don't want Dad to suffer in the process. What do I do? Should I let Aunt Laura handle this, or try to smooth things over before it gets worse? I'm so tired of fighting, but I also don't want to let Nick walk all over me. So, things escalated. Big time. I wasn't sure if Aunt Laura would actually follow through on confronting Dad, but oh boy, she did, and then some. She called me yesterday to tell me she was hosting a family meeting at her house and that I had to be there. According to her, this situation wasn't just unfair to me. It was a betrayal of family values. I didn't want to go at first. I was already emotionally drained, and the thought of another confrontation made me feel sick. But Aunt Laura was insistent. If you don't stand up for yourself now, they'll keep walking all over you, she said. And honestly, she had a point. So, last night, I found myself sitting in Aunt Laura's living room, facing down my dad, Nick, and his wife, Stacy. Aunt Laura had her husband and another one of our cousins there for moral support, or backup, depending on how you look at it. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Aunt Laura wasted no time. I've heard some things that don't sit right with me, she started, glaring at Dad and Nick. 4 years, my name, has taken care of you, Dad's name, without complaint. She sacrificed her time, her career, and her personal life for you. And now, you're rewarding her by handing everything over to Nick? How is that fair? Nick immediately went on the defensive. Look, we didn't come here to get attacked. This is about what's best for Dad. And what's best for Dad is to alienate the person who's been there for him through thick and thin. Aunt Laura shot back. I don't think so. And what's this I hear about the house? That's supposed to go to both of you, not just Nick. At this point, Dad looked incredibly uncomfortable. Laura, I didn't mean to upset anyone. I just thought this arrangement made the most sense. Aunt Laura wasn't having it. Made the most sense for who? Nick? Because it sure doesn't make sense for my name. That's when Nick finally snapped. You know what? This is ridiculous. My name chose to take care of Dad. No one forced her. And yeah, maybe she did more than I did, but I have a family to take care of. I can't just drop everything like she can. That comment hit me like a ton of bricks. Drop everything? I said, my voice shaking. Do you have any idea how much I did drop? My career, my social life, my plans for the future. All of it went on hold so I could take care of Dad. Meanwhile, you gotta live your life like nothing had changed. And now you're acting like I'm the selfish one? Nick rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. You act like you didn't have a choice. You could have put Dad in a care home if it was too much for you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wow. Just wow. So, all the years I spent making sure Dad was comfortable, healthy, and loved, that was a choice I made out of convenience? Do you even hear yourself? Stacy finally chimed in, trying to play peacemaker. Look, we all appreciate what you've done. My name? But at the end of the day, Dad's living with us now, and we're taking on those responsibilities. It makes sense for the inheritance to reflect that. Aunt Laura wasn't letting that slide. Responsibilities? What responsibilities? You're already talking about hiring help for Dad. My name did all of this without any support, and now you're expecting her to just walk away with nothing? Over my dead body. For the first time in the conversation, Dad finally spoke up. Enough. Everyone enough, he said, raising his hand like he was calling for order in a courtroom. I didn't realize how much hurt this decision was causing. My name, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to feel like your sacrifices didn't matter. They did. I could feel tears welling up, but I held them back. Then why are you doing this, Dad? Why are you rewarding Nick for doing the bare minimum while I'm left with nothing? Dad sighed deeply. I thought Nick needed the help more. He has a family to support, and you've always been so independent. That word, independent, made me want to scream. I've been independent because I had no choice, Dad. Do you think I wanted to give up my life? I did it because I love you. But now it feels like none of that even mattered. The room went quiet. Dad looked down at his hands again, like he was ashamed. Aunt Laura was the one to break the silence. So, what are you going to do about it? Dad's name? Because I'm telling you right now, this isn't right. And if you don't fix it, I'll make sure the whole family knows what's going on. After a lot of back and forth, Dad finally agreed to revisit the inheritance plans. He didn't commit to anything specific, but he did say he wanted to make things fairer. Nick, of course, was livid. He kept muttering about how this was all unnecessary drama and how I was playing the victim. Aunt Laura, bless her, wasn't having any of it. She told Nick to grow up and take responsibility for his actions. By the end of the night, Nick stormed out, dragging Stacy behind him, while Dad stayed behind to talk with me. He apologized again, saying he hadn't realized how much his decision was hurting me. I told him I wasn't trying to be greedy or ungrateful. I just wanted to be treated fairly. He promised he'd think about everything we discussed, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. I wish I could say I feel better, but I'm still so emotionally drained. Aunt Laura has been amazing, though. She told me she's going to keep checking in with Dad to make sure he follows through on his promise. Part of me feels guilty for involving her in this mess, but another part of me knows I needed her support. As for Nick, he hasn't spoken to me since the meeting, and honestly, I'm fine with that. Let him be mad. He got called out, and he doesn't like it. That's not my problem. I'm still trying to figure out what my next steps are. Do I keep pushing for fairness, or do I let this go and focus on rebuilding my own life? A big part of me wants to move on, but another part feels like walking away would be letting them win. What do you all think? After the family meeting, I had a lot to think about. I realized I was at a crossroads. I could keep fighting for fairness, or I could walk away and focus on my own life for the first time in years. Neither option felt great, but I knew I had to make a decision. Let me start with the aftermath of the family meeting. Nick stormed out, furious that Aunt Laura had called him out and Dad was reconsidering the inheritance. Since then, Nick has been on a rampage, telling anyone who will listen that I'm manipulative and trying to take what's his. I've been getting texts and calls from mutual relatives, most of whom are confused about what's going on. A few are taking Nick's side, saying I should be grateful that Dad is being cared for and that it's just money. But most people, especially those who know how much I've done for Dad, are firmly in my corner. Stacy even texted me once, saying, "This is causing so much stress for Nick and me. Can't you just let it go?" I didn't bother responding. If she thinks I'm going to back down just to make their lives easier, she clearly doesn't know me. A few days after the family meeting, Dad came over to talk. He seemed more reflective this time, which gave me some hope. He started by apologizing again, saying he didn't realize how much his decision was hurting me. "I've been thinking a lot about what you and Laura said," he admitted. "I want to make things right, but I also don't want to cause more conflict." I asked him what he meant by make things right, and that's when he dropped his idea. He proposed splitting the inheritance evenly between Nick and me. On paper, it sounded fair. But when I asked how that would work with the house, he hesitated. "Well," he said, "I was thinking Nick could still get the house, but we'd sell some of the other assets to even it out." I couldn't believe it. "So, Nick still gets the family home, and I get cash?" He nodded, clearly thinking this was a brilliant compromise. But to me, it felt like a slap in the face. The house has so much sentimental value. It's where we grew up, where I took care of him for years. Giving it to Nick felt like erasing my sacrifices. I told him I appreciated that he was trying to be fair, but this didn't feel like a real solution. "It's not just about the money, Dad. It's about what the house represents. Do you really think Nick deserves it more than I do?" Dad didn't have an answer for that, and the conversation ended with him promising to think about it some more. I left feeling more frustrated than ever. Aunt Laura, bless her heart, wasn't about to let this go. When I told her about Dad's proposed solution, she was livid. "He's still letting Nick walk all over you," she said. "This isn't right, and he knows it." She decided to call Dad herself and give him another piece of her mind. I wasn't part of that conversation, but I know it must have been intense because the next day, Dad called me and said he wanted to revisit everything. Apparently, Aunt Laura had pointed out that if he left the house to Nick, it would cause a permanent rift in the family. She reminded him that Nick had done next to nothing for him over the years, and that rewarding him with the family home would be a slap in the face to me. For once, it seemed like Dad was starting to see reason. Last night, Dad invited me over for dinner. I was nervous, but I went, hoping this would finally be the resolution I needed. After we ate, he sat me down and said he'd made his decision. "I've thought a lot about what's fair," he began. "You've done so much for me, and I don't want you to feel like that's being ignored. So, I've decided to split everything equally, house included." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him right. "What do you mean, house included?" "The house will be sold, and the proceeds will be split evenly between you and Nick," he explained. "It's not perfect, but it's the only way I can think of to make things fair." Part of me was relieved. This was much better than Nick getting the house outright, but another part of me was sad. I'd always dreamed of keeping the house in the family, and selling it felt like closing a chapter of our lives. Still, I knew it was the best compromise I was going to get. I asked Dad if he'd told Nick yet, and he shook his head. "I wanted to tell you first. I have no doubt Nick is going to lose his mind when he hears this. But honestly, I don't care anymore. I've spent so much of my life trying to keep the peace, and it's only ever left me feeling drained and unappreciated. If Nick wants to throw a tantrum, that's his problem. So, that's where things stand now. The house will be sold, and the inheritance will be split evenly. It's not the outcome I'd hoped for, but it's fair, and I can live with that. I'm also trying to focus on myself for the first time in years. I've started reconnecting with friends, looking into new career opportunities, and even thinking about dating again. It's weird having this much free time, but it also feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. As for Nick, we haven't spoken since the family meeting, and I'm fine with that. If he wants to sulk, that's on him. I'm done bending over backward to make other people happy. It's been a wild ride, but I'm finally starting to feel like I can move on with my life. And honestly, that's the best inheritance I could ask for. I thought selling the house and splitting the inheritance would bring some closure, but I underestimated just how much drama Nick would stir up in the aftermath. Buckle up, because this final chapter is a doozy. As expected, Nick was furious when Dad told him about the decision to sell the house. He called me almost immediately, and the conversation was explosive, to say the least. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" He spat as soon as I answered. "Dad was fine with giving me the house, but you had to drag Aunt Laura into it and turn him against me." I took a deep breath, determined to stay calm. "Nick, this isn't about turning anyone against you. It's about fairness. You can't honestly believe you deserve the house more than I do after everything I've done for Dad." He laughed bitterly. "Oh, spare me the martyr act. You're just jealous because I have a family and you don't. Admit it." That hit a nerve, but I refused to let him see it. "You know what, Nick? I'm done arguing with you. Dad made his decision, and it's final. If you have a problem with it, take it up with him." I hung up before he could say anything else and immediately blocked his number. I knew he'd find other ways to lash out, but I wasn't going to let him take up any more of my emotional energy. A few days later, Stacy called me. I didn't recognize the number, so I answered, not expecting the ambush that followed. "Hi, it's Stacy. I just wanted to say that Nick and I are really disappointed in how you've handled all of this. You've caused so much unnecessary tension in the family." I couldn't believe my ears. "Stacy, I don't know what you think I've done wrong. All I've ever wanted is for things to be fair. If that's causing tension, maybe you should look at how Nick's been acting." She sighed dramatically, like she was the victim here. "Nick's just trying to do what's best for Dad. You're making it about yourself." That was the last straw. "You know what, Stacy? I don't need to justify myself to you. If you're so worried about Dad, maybe you should focus on helping Nick take care of him instead of calling me to complain." I hung up and blocked her number, too. I was done playing nice. In the midst of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. One of my cousins, Sarah, reached out to me. She's Aunt Laura's daughter, and we've always been friendly but not particularly close. Apparently, she'd heard about the situation from her mom and wanted to check in. "I just wanted to say I think you're handling this really well," she said. "I know it's been a nightmare, but you're absolutely in the right." Her words meant more than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was standing alone in this fight, but knowing someone else saw my side was incredibly validating. Sarah went on to say that if I ever needed help dealing with Nick or just wanted to vent, she was there for me. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. The house went on the market shortly after Dad made his decision. Watching strangers walk through it during open houses was bittersweet. Every corner of that home was filled with memories, both good and bad. Part of me wanted to fight to keep it, but I knew it wasn't realistic. Selling it was the cleanest way to move forward. The sale went surprisingly fast. Within 2 weeks, we had an offer well above asking price. Dad was thrilled, and even Nick couldn't argue with the financial upside. Once the sale closed, the proceeds were split evenly between Nick and me, as promised. When the money hit my account, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't just about the money. It was the end of an era, but it was also a chance for a fresh start, and I was determined to make the most of it. With my share of the inheritance, I finally had the financial freedom to start rebuilding my life. I moved into a beautiful new apartment, upgraded my home office, and even took a few weeks off to travel, a luxury I hadn't had in years. I also started going to therapy, which has been incredibly helpful. For so long, I'd been carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations and guilt. Learning to put myself first hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. As for Dad, he seems to be adjusting to life with Nick, though I can tell he misses the quieter, more structured routine we had. He's called me a few times to chat and even apologized again for how things played out. I don't think he fully understands the depth of the hurt, but I appreciate the effort. And Nick? We're still not on speaking terms, which is fine by me. I've spent too much of my life bending over backward to accommodate him, and I'm not doing it anymore. If he wants to stay mad, that's his choice. This whole experience has been a roller coaster, but it's taught me some important lessons. I've learned that it's okay to stand up for myself, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. I've learned that family doesn't always mean fairness, and that's okay. Most importantly, I've learned that I deserve to put myself first sometimes. To anyone else out there dealing with family drama, just know you're not alone. It's hard and it's messy, but you have the right to fight for what's fair. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away and focus on your own happiness. Hey everyone, let's take a moment to reflect on OP's powerful story, a tale of sacrifice, betrayal, and ultimately empowerment. For years, OP gave everything to care for their aging father, their time, career, and even personal happiness. But when the father decided to move in with a brother who barely helped and planned to give him the entire inheritance, OP faced a heart-wrenching decision: fight for fairness or walk away. This story resonates with so many of us who have felt underappreciated in family dynamics. It shines a light on the emotional toll of caregiving, the injustice of being sidelined after making sacrifices, and the deep wounds that can form when loved ones don't acknowledge your worth. But it's not just a story of pain, it's a story of growth. OP stood up for themselves, even when it meant confronting their father and brother in a way they'd never done before. With the support of a strong ally, shout out to Aunt Laura, they reclaimed their voice and fought for the fairness they deserved. So, what can you take from this? Speak up for yourself. Fairness isn't selfish, it's necessary. Don't let guilt define you. Your sacrifices deserve recognition. Choose yourself. OP's decision to walk away from toxic dynamics and focus on their own happiness is a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is prioritize your own well-being. If you've ever been in a similar situation, know that you're not alone. This story is a call to action for anyone who feels undervalued by their family or taken for granted in relationships. You deserve fairness. You deserve respect. And you deserve to live a life where your sacrifices are acknowledged and celebrated. Let's talk about it. What would you have done in OP's shoes? How do you handle family drama when the stakes are high? Share your thoughts, experiences, or even just words of encouragement for anyone facing similar struggles. Let's support each other and remind ourselves that standing up for what's right is always worth it.